I know you say you didn't remember a lot from Nagwaffen. Do you remember how you exited out?
I remember being taken off the ship and told my time was up. And I didn't know anything about that. The units I was in had all been told that Earth had been destroyed in a cobalt bomb war. So I had no idea that Earth was still there. And so this was a major shock to my system to be told that. I don't remember the debriefing. I do remember the machine that sent me back, and when I have to go for an MRI, I do a full-blown panic attack. Absolutely full-blown panic attack. Every time. And it gets worse each time, because as MRIs get more developed, they look more and more like that machine. Lou has to go in with me and hold onto my foot while I'm in it, because I just I ended up throwing up once, getting an MRI, because it was so much like the machine they used to send me back. I remember coming back through the same jump gate to New York. I don't know how I got to California, because that's where I've always lived as Earth human. I remember being back in my bed, not remembering my family. They were really pissed about it. My father was half Cherokee, and he was a preacher for the Church of Christ. And we were cult members, and that's how I was raised. And for me to suddenly one morning not remember my family or where I was or any of that was really disturbing to them. And their response to being disturbed was to beat me. In a lot of ways, they were worse than Langley. If they'd had a regeneration tank, they would have been as bad as Langley. I started kindergarten the September after I was returned. And I told the kindergarten teacher that Martians had left me on the doorstep. And of course she called my mom, who promptly beat me, and told my dad, and he beat me too. And I was 5. Well, not quite 5. I turned 5 in my kindergarten year. My birthday's in the fall. And so here I was, this little kid, with memories of being on Mars. And I was basically told I was a liar. And I learned real quick to not talk about it. And a couple of years later, whenever they tried to teach me to swim, I got pneumonia because I kept breathing in the water. Just like they had taught me to do at Langley. And yeah, there were signs all along. But I was too smart for... Well, we lived in the poor part of the Central Valley, and I went to school with kids from the labor camps. I don't think they have anything like that where you are. But in those days, California had the Braceros program, and they would have literally give temporary visas to a certain number of people from Mexico, and they would follow the fields as crops would get ripe and ready to harvest. The workers would go from one farm to the next, and they didn't have an actual boss, and they would live at these labor camps, and they were treated like slaves. So it was almost like being back on Mars. Except I was surface instead of underground, and I wasn't in a plane. And I learned a fierce protectiveness of those people who were mistreated. I guess my social justice warrior aspect came out of that. I've always identified more with them than the main culture. But I argued with the teachers when they were teaching science. I told them that Einstein was wrong. I was really good at math, in spite of the fact it wasn't base 60. I didn't think like any of the other kids. When I was little, I fought a lot. It took me a while to learn to live in a non-Teutonic society where females were supposed to be submissive. We moved a lot. Looking back on it, I think my father knew at some level that his kids were being kidnapped. But it didn't matter how often we moved or where we went. Every year, these guys in dark suits would show up and give the IQ tests and ask me a bunch of questions. And they would do, as we got older, they would do the same with my sister. I guess with the other kids, I never talked to them about it. I'm the oldest of 5. We all have signs of the genetic modifications. The others, I've never talked to them about this. They've tended to treat me like I was crazy anyway, because I would talk about things that were not normal. I had emotional problems as a teen, depression. I was a girl geek in the 70s. That kind of explains a lot. I earned a full scholarship to Cornell University in 1972. I was 17. My dad turned it down. In those days, females were legally the property of their father until they got married, and then they were the property of their husband. The Supreme Court changed that in 1982. So I was up against that. Because I was underage, which at that time was 21, there was nothing I could do about it. I didn't have a driver's license, I didn't have a car, I did have a job, but it was part-time, I didn't make much. Minimum wage was $1.65 an hour. And the ticket to get to Ithaca, New York, anyway, and get a place even in the dorms was going to cost me $1,500 in 1973.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Well, I went to my grandfather, my mom's dad, And first thing he said was, "What did your father say?" And I told him, and he says, "Well, I'm not going to override your dad." So that was the extent. So I ended up having a mild nervous breakdown and then went to junior college, which I graduated with. I graduated high school with a 3.6, and I graduated junior college in 3 semesters instead of 4 with a 3.0. And then I got married, and my first husband had petit epilepsy and would get mad and beat me and then claim he didn't remember. And he broke my neck in 1977. We had 3 kids that have congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and I believe that's because of the genetic modifications that were done on me. I have 2 grandchildren that are carriers but seem to be disease-free. My kids are all about your age. My family, my parents were eugenicists, and my mother told me flat out to let them die. And when I didn't, she disowned me. And my father died in 1980. And my grandfather died a couple of years later. My mom remarried, and he had been a warrant officer in the Army and had supervised the construction of nuclear weapons. And he says, "And that's all I can tell you, or I have to kill you." So we never asked. My mom ever since then swears that I'm going to get her arrested because my stepdad was involved in this, and I'm talking. And it's part of her attempts to clamp me down into this quiet, submissive little girl person. Well, Mom, if they arrest you, it's going to be on your own. To be honest, we barely speak. She's disowned me 4 times and then claimed she didn't, and it's been one manipulative thing after another. I do understand that this thing is multi-generational, that she has obvious alters, so she was put through the same kind of thing that I was, who knows when, and she was abducted and her kids were messed with. She has O negative blood. All 5 of us have O positive, and none of us died. And this was before the ROGAM shot. So it's obvious to me that military laboratories did this and made sure we survived. Eisenhower told them in '53 to do whatever it took for humans to survive the Draco terraforming of Earth. And that's what they've been doing. They've been kidnapping people and genetically modifying and sending people to Mars and Ceres and elsewhere in the solar system. There will be people that will survive it. Some of them are American, and some of them are German, and some of them are from other countries. Every country that has nuclear weapons except North Korea is part of the program. So all of this surface antagonism between countries is just for show. They're going to keep us divided so we can't unite against them. I see Earth very differently from most people simply because I know what's gone on in space. It's not Earth is not being run for humanity. Earth is being run for the elite, and they're planning on leaving and leaving us with the mess. And that's the short version. They think that because they're allied with the Draco that they're going to be spared. I don't think so. The Draco don't work that way.